My name is Kim Bouffard, and I'm the Manager of Belonging and Engagement at Engineers Canada. On behalf of Engineers Canada, I'd like to wish you all a happy National Engineering Month, and thank you for taking the time to join us for this year's National Kickoff event. Engineers Canada is the national organization of the 12 engineering regulators that license the more than 300,000 members of the engineering profession in Canada. Presented by Engineers Canada, National Engineering Month is Canada's largest celebration of engineering. It revolves around the theme, "There's a place for you in engineering," which celebrates the diversity of thought, opportunities, and people that make up the engineering profession and demonstrates that there's a place for everyone in engineering. It is also an opportunity to discuss how engineering shapes our daily lives, and the month is designed to help foster a strong, diverse, and inclusive engineering culture in Canada. In advance, I would also like to wish you a happy World Engineering Day, which we'll celebrate this Saturday, March 4th. Before I pass over the mic to our moderator and panelists to kick off this year's discussion, reflecting back and looking forward, engineering culture and the future of the profession, I'd like to acknowledge I am joining you from the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Omami Winniwinnig Anishinaabe. As we are joining from across the land we all now call Canada, I'd also like to acknowledge all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people who have been and continue to be stewards of this land. As the only national voice of the profession, we want you to know that the engineering profession is committed to continuing our journey towards truth and reconciliation. And as the national body, Engineers Canada will continue to support and push the profession forward by directly addressing the ongoing ignorance, racism, and denial that exists. We know that our journey towards reconciliation will be a long one, and we are committed to moving this forward together. J'aimerais également souhaiter la bienvenue à tous les Canadiens francophones. Nous sommes très heureux de vous avoir parmi nous pour cette discussion importante. Engineers Canada s'est engagé à faire en sorte que ces ressources et ces événements soient disponibles dans les deux langues officielles. Vous remarquerez que nous avons une traduction en direct pour cet événement. Il suffit de cliquer sur le bouton qui indique l'interprétation et de le choisir français. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge our official sponsor for this event and for National Engineering Month as a whole, Manulife. Engineers Canada and Manulife have been working together for a very long time. And this year, we are celebrating 75 years of helping to protect engineering professionals and their families. As part of this 75-year celebration, and starting today on March 1st, Manulife will be reducing premiums for new and additional term life coverage by 75%. Here today, on behalf of Manulife, to introduce our moderator and to get this discussion started, is Manulife's National Director of Partnerships and Business Development for Affinity Markets, Jim Samaras. Jim?
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here as part of the kickoff for National Engineering Month and to be able to support this event on behalf of Manulife. As we reflect back, as part of the theme here, Manulife has been a proud partner of Engineers Canada for the past 75 years, which is a truly incredible milestone that we're celebrating for a program that has been providing financial protection to engineers and their families. Looking forward, we are truly honored to be able to support programs such as National Engineering Month that promotes and showcases the profession, as well as a talented and inspirational engineering community as they look to evolve and strive to better all our futures. We look forward to celebrating many more milestones together. And with that, let me introduce our moderator for today. Adrian Harewood has been a journalist for over a quarter century. He was the host of CBC Ottawa's Drive Home radio show, All in a Day, for 3 years, and then the anchor for CBC Ottawa News at 6 for 13 years. In 2017, he was nominated for a Canadian Screen Award for Best Interviewer, and in 2020, he won the Canadian Screen Award for Best Local Anchor. Adrian has been the guest host of national programs on radio and television, including The Current, As It Happens, Sounds Like Canada, and The House, Counterspin, Hot Type, and Power in Politics. He has interviewed people like Salman Rushdie, Angela Davis, Bill Clinton, Alanis Obomsawin, Branford Marsalis, Naomi Klein, and Ken Dryden, to name just a few, and his writing has appeared in publications such as the Globe and Mail. Currently, Adrian teaches the video journalism course and fourth-year course Journalism Now and Next at Carleton University, where he created the journalism school's first ever course focused on race, a graduate seminar called Journalism, Race, and Diversity. He also created the first course in Canada devoted to the study of the history of Black Canadian journalism. He's a board member of Journalists for Human Rights. Please join me in welcoming Adrian.
Well, thanks so much, Jim, for that very kind and generous introduction. And good morning, good afternoon to all of you from coast to coast to coast. I'm certainly looking forward to what promises to be a very dynamic conversation this morning. Since ancient times, we know that engineering has led to the emergence of inventions that have fundamentally shaped the way human beings live, build communities, solve vexing problems, traverse spaces, interact with each other, and engage with the environment. It really is impossible to imagine. It's impossible to fathom the world in which we live without the myriad contributions of engineering and of engineers. And while every day engineering helps to recreate and reinvent the world and imagine different futures, we know that engineering culture must change with the times in order to meet the needs of a diverse society and reflect these times. What does it mean to be an engineer in Canada in 2023? What are the most critical challenges facing engineering culture? How can we construct and cultivate an engineering culture where everyone feels that they can participate and belong? As has been mentioned, our theme today is reflecting back and looking forward, engineering culture and the future of the profession. It's often said to create the future, we must understand the past, but today we have the future right here on our panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce all of our panelists, and then I will proceed to our first question. Griffin Murdoch is the president of the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students, aka the CFES, an organization that represents the 85,000 engineering students that are currently pursuing engineering studies across Canada. Carrie Zacharias is an assistant professor, Center for Engineering, Professional Practice and Engineering Education at the University of Manitoba, and one of the co-facilitators of the Retool the Iron Ring movement. John Gamble is the CEO and president of the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies in Canada. Some of the largest engineering employers in Canada are members of his organization. Randy Herrmann is the director of the Engineering Access Program, a support program designed to assist First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students seeking an engineering degree. Randy is also a member of the Manitoba Métis community. And Jeanette Southwood is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at Engineering Canada. And really, to begin, I wanted to start with Griffin, because as I mentioned, to create the future, we must understand the past. But really, Griffin, you represent the future as the president of the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students. In your opinion, do students feel welcome and part of the engineering community?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction. To begin with, I think students really do and really are starting to feel more and more welcome. Just to give a really quick anecdote, just a couple of weeks ago, I got to go to the ENGAQueers Canada first ever national conference. They're a really close partner of the CFES, and we're really happy to have seen that they threw such an absolutely incredible event. At that event, I had the privilege of watching Kim Bouffard and Jeanette, so two of the people that you've already seen speak today, or one that you will see speak later, talk about the future of engineering and the challenges of intersectionality within engineering and the goals of expanding the kind of how welcoming the engineering profession is. And I didn't really watch them when they were presenting. I watched all of the other people in the room. They were sitting there and I could see just the gears clicking together, people realizing that the people that represent our profession at the absolute highest level, like fundamentally get it. And as a little bit silly as that is, but it really matters. Seeing these people understand that how that people that will be guiding the rest of their lives and the profession and the rest of their careers in their profession do understand the challenges and the complexities of the challenges that arise with intersectionality, that arise with just everyone bringing their own history to their lives and to their careers, was really impactful. And I think that will have a major impact on everyone that was in that room. Now, getting that message to everyone else is challenging sometimes. The CFES only reaches about 10% of students get to come to our events once within their career as an engineering student. So getting that message out can be really tough, but that's what we strive to do. That's what we struggle to do a lot within our work. And I know that Engineers Canada and the other boards across the country do that as well. So I think they absolutely can feel welcome within the community, but as someone who's graduating in a couple months and still looking for work, by the way, I know that it's also a nerve-wracking time to be joining the engineering community. So I think they can feel welcomed, but it's so dependent on where they go and who's the one doing the welcoming.
Griffin, given the fact that you are engaged with students on a daily basis, across this country, is it your sense that students feel equipped to take on the challenges and opportunities of issues as complex as climate change, or to play their role in enacting social justice?
Yeah, that's a really, really challenging one. We do a lot of courses on, calculus, which terrible, not a great time most of the time. And a lot of those really down to the ground technical skills don't really prepare you for trying to promote social justice or trying to promote climate change within your designs when you graduate. We do also have courses that do prepare you for that, or events and other things that help with that experiential learning experience. And that's something that the CFES has been pushing for I think, as long as we've existed, for more and more experiential learning to prepare students more and more for the workplace and their careers after they graduate. But honestly, I think the biggest challenge for students wanting to do that isn't the passion. They have the passion, they have the drive, they want to build a world where kids or dogs and cats that they have in the future will be able to live a positive and a life in a world that is a good life for them. The challenge is that when they graduate, they're coming from a group of peers into a place where they don't know exactly the political dynamics of whatever job they take, the challenges that they might face in enacting those policies. So many of them have that passion, but it's really, really on the people who are hiring them to help empower them to be able to channel that passion in a way that makes a difference. Without that help from above, it can be really disheartening and really inefficient, not knowing how and where to challenge your passions. So with that support, you're getting people graduating from engineering that are absolutely there and ready to change the world. And if they're given support from levels within their the organizations or from the rest of the community, I think absolutely they're prepared to do so.
Carrie, in your day job, you engage with students all the time, and you've been engaging with students, across generations. I'm just curious as to what your sense of this generation of engineering students is. What do they need? What are some of the particular challenges that they're facing?
Oh, that's a great question. In some ways, I feel like students themselves are a lot more equipped to answer that. So I love hearing Griffin's responses to that question. I love hearing the optimism that he radiates and that I hear a lot of my own students radiate when they speak. I think, as Griffin's alluded to, there's a lot of passion that I see in my own students around taking on huge socio-technical challenges like climate change, around making sure that their engineering work is really integrated with their values and things that they feel are really important to them. A challenge that I feel as an instructor is trying to help them do that, right? Trying to send them off into the world, into their careers, not only knowing calculus, as Griffin talked about, but being prepared to put that knowledge and put those skills to the uses that they want to use them for. So I teach myself some of those other courses that Griffin was talking about, some of the tech and society courses, some of the communication courses, some of the students that give some of the courses that give students at least a space to think about those bigger questions, if not an opportunity to experience some of that work themselves. I'm really passionate about doing that teaching. I wish that there was more of it. And I wish in particular that we could integrate some of that technical skill building more into this other kind of instruction. I would love for students to be able to learn calculus and statics and thermodynamics as they think about these larger questions, and to not sort of be pushed into thinking about them as separate domains, because they're really not.
And when it comes to this generation of students' conception of engineering culture, what are you hearing from them, Carrie? What do they say to you about the kind of engineering world that they want to build, that they want to enter?
I think there's I would say I hear different things from them. I hear a lot of hope about the capacity of engineering to contribute to a more sustainable world, a more equitable world. I also hear a lot of dominant, what I would think about as dominant aspects of engineering culture being reflected through the way that they think about those issues. So I hear sometimes, in conjunction with that passion about wanting to change things, a frustration or a feeling that that engineers are not a part of those questions, that engineering is limited to a certain type of problem, or limited perhaps by the problems that are handed to engineers or imposed upon engineers. So I see in my students a tension between hope and optimism, I would say particularly towards sustainability and equity. And at the same time, a feeling that maybe it's not their place to deal with those things, or maybe they're not sure how to.
John Gamble, what's your message to this generation of students? What do you want to know? What do you want them to know about this engineering culture that they're going to be entering and that they're going to be building?
Yeah, well, thank you, Adrian. By the way, thank you, Engineers Canada, for putting this together. We spend National Engineering Month talking about the great things, the important things we've done as a profession, as an industry, to create a great quality of life, and the wonderful things we've done, and they have been wonderful. But it's also important that we have these adult discussions, because there are things that we have not done as well as we could, and in some cases quite badly. So this is a very important discussion. So just segue back to your question, you know, we have a proud tradition of what we built on, but we could be doing it better. So what I find is when I'm interacting with Griffin and his colleagues at CFES, which I do quite a bit, who am I kidding? I'm learning far more from them than they are from me. I'm not there to teach calculus. I'm there to introduce them to the profession, to the industry. And it is so eye-opening where these people are. And they are going to make us better engineers, not just because of the technical skills. They understand that engineering sits at a nexus between science and nature and societal needs and values. They know that better than we do. I think we sort of know that, and I think we actually knew it better many years ago before the Industrial Revolution, but that's well in the rearview mirror. It's now about getting profitability, efficient design, getting things done quickly, faster. And we have a generation, as we've heard, they want to do bigger things. They really want to influence society. The International Federation of Consulting Engineers, of which AC is a member, their tagline is the trusted advisor. And you can't be, well, you can, but you'll be a much more trusted advisor if you actually reflect that society. So what have I seen happening? I think that students more and more are starting to interview employers. They're not asking about salaries and perks and, you know, whether they're going to have this summer. They're asking about their environmental, social governance. They're asking about your EDI policies. They're asking about other things that are easy for firms to do by flexibility, accommodation. They don't want to play this perverse pride that, you know, that we work 300 million hours this week. Yay, and we go for beers and talk about who worked harder. They want work-life balance, which allows us, in my opinion, to be better engineers. So there are things, and I think the light bulb is going off because there is a demand for talent. And they are offering a very important lens. And in fact, when we've been doing our own EDI study, and we've done focus groups with CEOs, with human resources people within our industry, we've interviewed women and others that have exited the industry. But one of the most informative is when we actually, and thank you, Griffin, for your role in this, is we actually use the CFES Leadership Conference in January to conduct our own focus group and asking the students, what do you see for the profession? Not us telling them what they're going to get, but if we could be better employers, if we can create better opportunities, what does that look like? And, you know, we're hoping to take that back to our membership. Some of them are ahead of the curve. Some of them are doing a great job. Some of them are biggest employers in the country. Yes, they are, but we also have a lot of small and medium-sized that don't have their own in-house human resources. So this is going to be invaluable to us as an industry, both in being viable commercially, but also just better outcomes.
Randy Herrmann, in your job, in your day job, you are engaging, you are having conversations with Inuit, First Nations, and Métis students. What are they telling you about how they imagine this engineering culture? And what do you want the profession to know about these young, dynamic, emerging engineers that they're about to welcome into their offices?
Great Great question, Adrian. And just to go back to a question you asked earlier, I would just like to note that you can tell by the snow on my roof that I didn't graduate last year from engineering. I would have to say, and having witnessed the last 20 years or so of 25 years of students graduating from engineering, I have to say that I am thoroughly impressed with the students coming out for many different reasons, but primarily just for their maturity. They are far better, infinitely better behaved than I was and my graduating class or undergraduate class was. And I just
why does
give
that not
kudos.
why does that not surprise me, Randy?
I know, right? I know. So, and this goes across the board. If there was any generation that's going to really shake things up and change things, it's this generation of students that are coming up. And specifically, if we're talking about Indigenous students, Métis, First Nation, Inuit students, many of them are coming, first of all, they're coming better prepared than they have been historically, and they're coming with more passion and fire. And they are seeing some of the injustices, and some of the injustices, the climate injustices, are happening in their communities, right? And they're seeing it, and they're saying, well, I want to be on this side of the coin so I can speak to, or I can change, or we can help address those issues. And I see that more and more for students coming through.
Do those students with whom you're dealing, do they feel as if once they enter the workplace, they can assert themselves, that they can bring their whole selves to the table, Randy?
Absolutely. And again, this is a change I've probably seen more so in the last 8 to 10 years than I did see previously. I know when I am talking to my students, I am telling them, when you go out into the engineering community, it is so important that you are yourself, that you bring your background to this community. And that background, whether you were raised in a rural community or an isolated community, or whether you're an urban Indigenous person, or even if you consider yourself to be a two-spirited Indigenous person, bringing your true self into engineering is the only way that we are going to affect real, meaningful change in the engineering profession.
Jeanette, I'm wondering what you're reflecting on as you hear some of the comments from our panelists, about the place of young engineering students in this new, in this future engineering culture.
Thanks for that question, Adrian. So first of all, I wanted to share that within our board policy, there are only 2 organizations that are specifically mentioned. And one of them is the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students. And that is because all of us here on the panel today, all of us at Engineers Canada, all of our stakeholders, we recognize the importance of that relationship with students and the role that students are going to be playing in the future. I had the great opportunity to participate in 2 of the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students meetings this past weekend. One of them was the Canadian Engineering Competition, and the other one was the Conference on Sustainability and Engineering. And in both those places, there is incredible innovation, cutting edge innovation. There's inspirational innovation. And one of the areas you might think, well, of course, there's going to be innovation at the Canadian Engineering Competition, and that's absolutely right. At the Conference on Sustainability and Engineering, the students were given some specific cases to work on and then to present on the very last day. And again, the innovation that they shared, the inspiration that they shared, the inspiration that they ignited in me was just wonderful. And I, like all of the others on the panel, have great hope, but also want to be able to expand the opportunities for students, for young engineers, for engineers in training, to be able to be out there and to speak and to share their thoughts and to participate in these conversations, because this is where engineering needs to go. We need to be able to bring everyone together and to reflect the motto or the theme of National Engineering Month, there's a place for you. And as engineers who are at a later stage in our careers, we need to be able to make that place so that the students are welcome, and the students need to be able to feel welcome so that they can participate. That culture change piece is so important. Thanks, Adrian.
Just to deepen this conversation a bit more, and Carrie, the question is for you and also for Griffin. We have this question from W.M. Dowie, and W.M. Dowie says engineering and other design build disciplines still silo themselves in their expertise, yet social justice and ecological literacy concepts demand cross-cutting thinking. What else can we do in school and professional development settings? So Carrie, perhaps we can begin with you. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I really appreciate that. I'm going to highlight the work of some of my colleagues here at the University of Manitoba here, specifically Sean Bailey, who is cross-appointed between the architecture and engineering schools, and my colleague Jillian Seniak-Chichek, who works here in the Center for Engineering Professional Practice. And with me, the two of them have developed a design build course that in the first instance of it worked with and on the Shoal Lake 40 First Nation community, brought engineering and architecture students and community members together, gave the students exposure to community dialogue and engagement with community, gave them a real world project to be looking at and real world people to be engaging with. There's going to be another instance with a different setting of that course happening this summer. It's hard to do these things. It's hard to fit them into the engineering curriculum. It's hard to make space in people's schedules, student schedules and faculty schedules. It's hard to bring students to a different location. It's hard to bring community members to the university. None of this is easy to do, but there are opportunities to build this kind of engagement into the curriculum, and there's some really wonderful things that have been happening here and I know elsewhere as well. So it's one small example. It's not an example of systemic change, but I think it's really important.
Griffin, what about you? How would you respond?
Yeah, I would say that similar to the ways that when you're designing a computer system, you need to build safety into every aspect of your design. You can't have safety systems. Every single part needs to ensure that you don't open yourself up to vulnerabilities and potential attacks from external sources. Both ecological conservation and the effect of designs on climate, as well as effective designs on society, need to just become part and be taught as part of the entire design process. The same way that in something more physical, safety is now designed as part of the entire process. So I think, and I've had the privilege of having a course that did do a lot of that, but I think encouraging in those design build courses for those to be taught as concepts of just something that you do in every step of your design. Every subsystem needs to consider, how could this affect society? How could this affect the environment? And your design as a whole, it just needs to be part of the design process, not some external added block, just baked into it as we teach the students coming through those courses.
Randy, I was hoping that you could weigh in on the question as well.
And that's good, Adrian, because I was hoping you would ask me to weigh in. I'm gonna use maybe one or two words here to answer that question. And one way I truly believe that we are going to move forward and start answering some of these questions that the caller brought up there is this: we need to start decolonizing engineering. And only is the way forward. We need to.
What does that mean, Randy? Because that's a term, and decolonizing, we know, has become a bit of a buzzword. My colleague Duncan McHugh has written a new book called Decolonizing Journalism, and he kind of defines what decolonizing means. What does decolonizing mean when it comes to engineering?
Well, it means a lot of things, and we're starting to get to them. We're starting to get to them even with this conversation, but we need to sort of deconstruct these colonial ideologies of the superiority and privilege of Western thought. If you think about engineering, we are inside a box, and that box is called Western science. And Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous science is outside of that box. And like I like to tell a lot of people, I know one thing engineers are really good at, and that's designing boxes. So let's design a bigger box. Let's design a box that will include Indigenous knowledge. And by doing so, we can start answering these questions and we can start breaking down these silos. And a good example is, and I use this quite a lot when I'm talking, is the example sort of a birch bark canoe. This was a historic craft, predates colonization. People on the prairies use this. Any Indigenous person over a certain age could go into a wood and construct a birch bark canoe in a couple of days, and they could have a craft that could take them from ocean to ocean to ocean to ocean with no problems. And they could do that. And when they were done with it, they would leave it there and it would be gone in a year, right? And so the guy who made the craft, he was an engineer. But if you ever seen any traditional birch bark canoes, he was also an artist. And those two things can coexist. He was also a chemist. They did everything, right? She, I apologize for using inappropriate pronouns, but you know, they can do all of that. And I think the way forward in engineering is to start thinking about that model again. Let's get more creativity. Let's get more diversity, right? All these different groups of people need to have their voice. Engineering has to change. And I'm gonna be, you know, maybe provocative here. Engineering cannot continue to be a frat party for overprivileged white men. It can't. It has to change.
Jeanette, your hand is up, and John, I see your head nodding. So Jeanette, why don't we start with you? You wanted to respond.
Yes, thanks so much, Adrian. I'll use Randy's analogy of the bigger box and start there. And specifically, I'm going to share a little bit about what's happening in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and what's happened in the past. So in the past, as our engineering colleagues have attempted to tackle the equity, diversity, and inclusion challenges, they've often looked to each other. They've looked to other engineers. They've looked to their engineering management in engineering companies. They've looked to their leaders who were engineers. And what we've identified and what others have identified, we're, for example, part of a research consortium called Engendering Success in STEM that is led out of the University of British Columbia and includes organizations right across the country. What they and we have identified is that it's necessary to make change, to have others outside of engineering, to have sociologists, psychologists, those who are knowledgeable about change management, just as examples, because with the engineering knowledge set, that culture change piece is not going to be able to be accomplished. And that bigger box, again, to use Randy's analogy, needs to include not only engineers, but people of a wide variety of professions. And I'm speaking specifically about equity, diversity, and inclusion, but that analogy is an apt analogy in sustainable cities, in connecting with those who are rural, those who are up in the north, those who are in many other places and in many other situations. Thanks, Adrian.
And John, did you have a comment?
Well, there's so much here that's really gold. Yeah, I mean, we've come a long way as an industry about being multidisciplinary. You know, firms used to be very specific, and engineering companies were engineering companies, and architectures were architecture companies. And Eureka, we discovered that integrated teams, whether they're within the same corporate structure or you partnered, had better results. If the structural engineer understood what the architect was doing, better outcome. If we listen to the naturalists and the biological scientists, we have less environmental consequence. We've learned this. We understand that different lenses result in different and better solutions. Not that any one lens is wrong or faulty or incorrect. It's just that you want to take advantage of the cumulative impact of all these lenses. Where the light bulb is finally going off is it's cultural, it's gender-based. There are other important lenses, and we don't know what we don't know. And that's why we need to build allies. We need to embrace these other ideas, not be defensive. All privilege means is that it's just acknowledging you had a different starting line than somebody else, and we get very defensive about it. We need to accept this and use it and grab it as an opportunity to do better engineering. Again, going back to my premise, we don't exist for our own sake. We don't, whether it's a bridge or a fusion reactor or it's a site remediation, we don't do it for its own sake. We do it for a social and economic or an environmental benefit. And we do that better if we actually understand these things. And how do we understand them? Bring the people with the right lenses. And I think we're finally having that. There's two challenges though. It's overcoming not only the perception of our cultural inertia, the actual cultural inertia. We got to keep leaning back on that. And then once they're in the workforce, we as an industry and other employers, because they don't all work for consulting engineering companies, they work in a wide variety of environments, but we have to do a better job of retaining them. And that means creating environments where they are welcome, where they're heard, where they're safe. It's not easy because there's so many workplaces, but the outcome is so compelling. Why would we not do it?
John, I think that's a nice segue to the next question that I wanted to pose. There's been a lot of attention lately on the Iron Ring ceremony. The Iron Ring, of course, is a ring worn by many Canadian-trained engineers as a symbol and reminder of the obligations and the ethics associated with their profession. And the ring is presented to engineering students in a private ceremony known as the Ritual of the Calling of an Engineer. And many believe that the ceremony in 2023 is outdated. Carrie, my question is to you. What are the problems with the current ceremony? And why does it matter whether we continue with the traditional ceremony or change it?
Thank you for that question, Adrian. And thank you so much to Engineers Canada for inviting me to come and speak on behalf of our group. We're the Retool the Ring group, which I'm a part of, is a very small, informal ad hoc group that really formed last summer. We are engineering students and recent graduates. We're engineering educators like myself. We're practicing engineers. But there's not very many of us, and we all have day jobs, and we see our purpose is trying to sort of bring together some voices that have been talking about the Iron Ring ceremony for a long time, and trying to raise those voices up. So I really appreciate this platform to do that. To answer your question, I have a lot to say about that, so I'll try and keep it short-ish and then maybe expand on it later. I think that the first and foremost, the reason why the ceremony needs to change is because it's not fulfilling one of its major intended purposes. The ceremony, yes, is meant to affirm a commitment to ethical engineering practice. I have some issues with that part of it as well, which I'll come to later, but one of its other main purposes is to welcome new engineers into their profession, into their community. And we know that it's not doing that effectively now. So one thing that has happened since this group has formed is that I've heard a lot of stories from people who are members of our group and from other people outside the group who've shared their stories with us about their own experiences with the Iron Ring ceremony. A lot of those stories are about discomfort or unease. So one member of our group who's a faculty member who's attended quite a few of these ceremonies talks about the whispers that you hear at the receptions after the ceremony, the rumblings of people going, that was really weird. What was that we did? That felt really cultish. There's a lot of that. This is not an ideal way to welcome people into the profession by leaving people with this initial impression of that was really strange. But there's also a more serious aspect of this. There's a lot of people that feel a bit weird or a bit uneasy. And there are a lot of other people who feel so separated from or so alienated by this ceremony and the values that are embedded in the ceremony that they either choose not to take part at all, or they take part and they're harmed by the experience. So we've heard these stories from engineers who are women, engineers who are non-binary or queer or two-spirited, engineers who are Indigenous, engineers who are atheists, engineers who are newcomers to Canada, all kinds of different people who have these really negative associations and experiences with the ceremony themselves. And in some cases, those engineers after the ceremony or in the run-up to it have reached out to their camps or to the Corporation of Seven Wardens and voiced those concerns and tried to make change. And what we've heard from those folks by and large is that their efforts to critique and change the ceremony have been met with resistance in the name of tradition. And so I want to speak to that tradition and to what you said at the beginning of this conversation, Adrian, about understanding the past, because it's really important to realize that that discomfort and that harm that people are experiencing are rooted in the origins of the ceremony itself. So this ceremony dates back to the 1920s. A foundational event that led to the creation of this ceremony was a speech that Herbert Edward Terrick Haultain, who was an engineering professor at the University of Toronto, made in 1922 to the Engineering Institute of Canada. He was speaking to a mixed audience of men and women, which was unusual because women were in general excluded from events at the Engineering Institute of Canada at the time. There was an exception made for this speech in particular. And during the speech, Haultain made an appeal to the women in the audience in particular to help engineers, male engineers, identify what he called a tribal soul or a spirit within that profession. Of course, we can also recognize that language as appropriate of Indigenous cultures. Engineering is not a tribe. But he used this tribal language, and he spoke to the women in the audience in particular, positioning them obviously not as engineers, but as sort of subservient to engineering, and asking them to help the men in the engineering profession find their soul, find their spirit, find something that could bind them together as a community. And subsequent to that speech, Haultain formed a committee with some other engineers and engineering professors. The result of that was that they eventually reached out to Rudyard Kipling, a British imperialist poet and writer, to ask him for his help in composing the ceremony. So today, when students or practicing engineers prepare to participate in the Iron Ring ceremony, they do get some of this history. They get the story of Haultain maybe putting this group together. They get the story of, you know, wanting to bind engineers together as a community. They get a story about Rudyard Kipling, which says that he was a great poet and a writer, which says that he was someone who cared about and wrote about engineers, that he was a Nobel laureate. All of that is true, of course. What they don't get is the story of Kipling's role as one of the great champions of British colonialism and imperialism, right? So 20 years before Haultain asked Kipling to help with the Iron Ring ceremony, Kipling had published his poem, The White Man's Burden. This literally describes the burdensome but quote unquote necessary work of white people to civilize the rest of the world. The poem refers to indigenous people as half devil and half child. He used the poem in part to encourage the US to engage in a war in the Philippines. These were racist and imperialist views that were extraordinary even for his time. So Kipling was criticized by numerous contemporary authors and thinkers. So the salient point here is not only that Haultain and Kipling personally held values that we find repugnant today, but that these values are really embedded in the ceremony itself. The ceremony includes readings from Judeo-Christian religious texts as well as religious language. Some of those words have been removed, but some of them remain. It's deeper than the wording, though. It gets to the atmosphere of the ceremony itself, which is Masonic in nature. Kipling was a Freemason. The symbolism of the chains that are used during the ceremony, the sort of secrecy and exclusivity that surrounds it. So these things are really deeply rooted in the ceremony itself.
But Carrie, can nothing be preserved? Like, is there anything worth keeping in the ceremony? Because there's some who will say, you know, Carrie, these traditions can be problematic, yes. But at their core, there are some aspects of it that we can hold on to, and that can maybe help to inform the way in which engineers come into the profession, and help provide them with guidance. So can not any element be reformed?
I think the concept of a ritual, the practice of a ceremony, is incredibly valuable. I think the symbolism of the Iron Ring is incredibly valuable. I think the idea of something that welcomes people to a community is beautiful. I think the affirmation of engineering ethics and engineering responsibility is really important and a really great way to welcome graduating students and engineers who are newcomers to Canada into the profession. The problems with the ceremony sort of that go beyond the discomfort and harm that people feel, they also relate to an outdated view of engineering ethics that the ceremony presents. So the obligation that I took when I participated in the ceremony myself, that engineers take today, it defines good engineering practice in certain ways. It talks about avoiding material failure. It talks about being humble. It talks about being respectful and loyal to one's fellow engineers. All of those things are important. I would argue the loyalty to one's fellow engineers maybe less so than the other three, but those are all important things. I would love to see all three of those things reflected in a modernized ceremony, a current ceremony. What they're not is a complete picture. So they're not a complete picture of what engineering responsibility is. We have codes of ethics, of course, now that emphasize public safety and public welfare. The public is not a part of the ceremony as it currently exists. The ceremony doesn't say anything about care and stewardship of the environment. So there's lots of a lot of the motivations of the ceremony, I think, are really important. The symbolism of the ring, I think, is beautiful. There's lots of those parts that I would like to see maintained, but the tone and the authorship, I think, is really problematic.
John Gamble, your response. Should the ceremony be retained?
You know, we don't have gladiatorial games anymore. You know, we need to look at history completely. I agree. The Iron Ring is a wonderful metaphor about how fallible we are, which is an important thing to remember. And as a side note, my Iron Ring is the only thing I have from university that still fits me. But we need to I think we need a more complete picture of the history of that ceremony. Yeah, I agree. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we need to make it inclusive. We need to make it more relevant to today, speaking to the whole multidisciplinary, multiple lenses. It's the being insular into ourselves is no longer deemed to be a strength of engineering. It's our ability to reach out into other communities and understand perspectives so that we can have more complete, holistic solutions that not only solve all the material things that the Iron Ring ceremony speaks to, but the better societal outcomes. And I think that's a missing piece. So there are things there that we can preserve. We can talk about the complete history and use it as a teaching point. But yes, when in the lens of time, because as we all know that windscreens are very foggy and rear view mirrors are high definition. And I look back to my 20-something self, and yeah, that was a pretty weird ceremony.
Griffin, does the Iron Ring ceremony need to be, put into the dustbin of history, or can it be reformed?
I think for students nowadays, the Iron Ring ceremony is a really hot button issue because students especially, we don't have a lot of vision into what it's happened and what it is and what happens within it. And that's obviously part of the problem. And certain camps are trying to improve that and certain camps aren't. But when you enter in, especially nowadays, into the beginning of your undergraduate degree, you really get told that, you have convocation, but the Iron Ring ceremony is kind of when you truly become an engineer. That's really what a lot of students see as the end of their path as an undergraduate engineer. It holds a lot of emotional significance to a lot of engineering students, and they know, and myself included, don't know that much about it. You hear it as this incredible thing that's going to happen to you, and that's gonna kind of bring you into the wider community. And there is a lot of stuff kind of emotionally attached to that. However, the challenge is that it doesn't call everyone. It calls people that look a lot like me. And that's a problem because the many, actually, in fact, for me, most of my colleagues don't look like me. And them not being called to be engineers and not being called properly to use the terms that are used in the calling, is a problem. It alienates people from being an engineer and from their community at the moment that they themselves, a lot of the time, have built up to be the moment where they should feel most included in that community. And that is a major, major problem. Now, we could change everything. We could throw it all out, but so many students are so attached to it just from that I think there is value in trying to keep the positive aspects of it, of bringing people into that community, as long as we can make sure that it brings everybody into our community.
Jeanette, how would you describe your relationship with the Iron Ring ceremony, and do you see a future for the ceremony?
I do see a future for the ceremony, very similarly to what Carrie and John and Griffin shared. I remember the Iron Ring ceremony very similarly to what John and Carrie remember. I also remember that it was one of the key events, probably the key event that undergraduate engineering students look forward to for all of their undergraduate years. There was great excitement. To many engineering students, it was an even more important event than convocation. So I think that there's a lot of wonderful community building things that can be retained from the ceremony. But I also think that there are very, very key aspects, major foundational aspects that need to be changed, as shared by Carrie, Griffin, and John. Thanks, Adrian.
Randy, what do you see as being the future for the Iron Ring ceremony, if indeed it has a future?
Absolutely it has a future. I don't think there's anyone on this panel or even beyond this panel that's calling to throw the ceremony out. We want to continue with the ceremony. We just want it changed to be inclusive, which is different than what the suggestion is at this point. It can absolutely be reformed. It isn't even that hard. What we're facing right now in the reformation, or even the proposed reformation of this ceremony, is what I'll call the traditionalists. People that are telling us, well, it's tradition, we did this, so we have to continue doing it this way. There was a lot of things over history that were tradition, and we've realized that tradition wasn't very good or very appropriate, and we have changed. Engineering needs to change. And as engineers in our careers, this is what we do. We make objects, we change the environment, we change things to be better. Why can't we change this ceremony that's already 100 years old? It doesn't make any sense.
So Randy, let's get specific then. What would you change? What are a couple things that you would change?
Well, I would make it. I would remove. And this is me personally. I'm different. I'm not speaking on behalf of Change the Ring ceremony. The first thing I would remove is all the male gender references. The second thing I would remove is all the Christian references. Right?
Why the Christian references?
Well, because when I've been to let's say 18 of the last 25 engineering ring ceremonies, right? Not everybody in that room is Christian. As a matter of fact, I bet you 20 to 30% of them are not Christian, right? So you're talking about 20 to 30% of the group. I have seen people who of different religions who are very strongly based in their religion walk out because they are unable to make the swearing declaration that we expect them to make, right? So this is not right. If Canada truly believes that we are part of a multicultural society, we have to walk the walk and talk the talk. The engineering ring ceremony is not walking the walk or talking the talk, right? So these are some of the things that we need to be looking at. And again, this is my personal, I'm not showing, but I know being part of that ceremony, many of my students have felt alienated. So much so that some of them, and this is going back 15 years already, when they went through the ceremony, came to me to complain about the colonized nature of the ceremony, and I encouraged them to write a letter to the wardens, which then was not answered, forgotten about, because they were just one, right?
Harry, you got us started on this. Maybe you can have the last word, your reflections on what you've heard.
Yeah, so firstly, I want to acknowledge that the Corporation of the Seven Wardens, which is the organization that controls the Iron Ring ceremony, has committed to making some kind of change, and I'm really pleased about that. My concern, or my hope, my desire is that change is that the process of making that change is inclusive, and the change that results from it is meaningful. And I believe that there's a good chance that will happen, and I'm excited about that. So I want to acknowledge the work that the wardens are doing. I think that the issues with the ceremony go beyond words. I know that there already have been efforts to change masculine pronouns to make them more inclusive and to remove, for example, specific references to my maker and replace those with other things. I really think the issues are deeper than that. I think it's disingenuous to begin an event with a land acknowledgement and then continue with words that have been written by one of the biggest cheerleaders of colonialism that the British Empire ever produced. So I believe very strongly in a lot of the meaning that's within the ceremony and a lot of the intention of the ceremony. I think it's really important that it be rewritten and redesigned with broad input from people who have been harmed or excluded by the current ceremony, and people from outside of engineering as well that have their own sort of relationships with the products of engineering work.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to move on to the next question, and thank you very much for that very vigorous conversation around the Iron Ring ceremony. Research over the last 5 years has confirmed that many engineering workplaces are not welcoming, and in some cases not safe for women engineers. There's still cultures of exclusion that continue to exist, which make it harder for women and marginalized groups to thrive within the profession, with many choosing to leave it. John Gamble, what is the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies in Canada's position on equitable workplace culture? And what are you hearing from your members about the opportunities and challenges of making the necessary culture change within large engineering employers?
Very valid question. I'll just start with the premise that engineers work in a variety of environments, employers, situation, and sectors. So there's no one solution fits all. Some areas are much more progressive than others. Others are far less progressive, to my opinion, to their own detriment. In terms of what our piece of the world, the consulting engineering sector, I think there is absolutely an awareness. And I think there's also some humility that that we don't know all the answers. This actually started, we're in the midst of a pretty substantial undertaking to just try to understand so that we can make informed decisions, because it's no secret that the cultural inertia, the people that are in the leadership in our role, not exclusively, but disproportionately, are white males, because that's what came out of the university system then. There is at least the self-awareness to know that looking through that own lens is not going to solve your problems. It's just going to result in confirmation bias. So we've gone out to our members. We've gone out not just to the engineers in the firms, the people that are hiring on the front lines, new hirees, human resources people. As I alluded to, we went instead of the basket, we went straight to the orchard and used the CFES to sort of ground our reality. We interviewed women that have left the industry, because that's very telling. And what's coming back loud and clear is that we first of all have to have at least an acknowledgement that we have not done a good job historically in the past, and be open to hearing the other views and the other lenses. But to do that, you've got to surround your people. There's a saying that you need to see it to be it. I used to be very much like many engineers. I thought of myself as completely objective. Follow the facts. If somebody's particularly qualified, they should be moved into the position. That's very sound. It is until you recognize that all that criteria was framed by a similar demographic, and it has some built-in confirmation bias. Not that the criteria are not valid, but it's incomplete. The other thing I'll say is that if you believe that diverse organizations make better decisions, have better outcomes, are more creative and more innovative, and frankly, more pleasant places to work and more interesting places to work, well, then that diversity is not a quota. It's a qualification. Why would you not go out to get it? If I need a land use planner on a project team, I go out and get one. If I need a structural engineer for a certain element of a project, I go out and get it. So why are we not doing that with some of the societal lenses that are so important to us delivering that? One thing we're finding, though, is that and I alluded to this earlier, there's a little bit of almost this, almost like we have to compete with medical school training. We have to work harder and longer and suffer more to really pay our dues. But that, why would we want exhausted, tired people making decisions? Why are we charging by the hour? Now, this is a much more complex issue, because the number of hours you work on a project has no correlation to its value to the owner, to society. It has no correlation to the risk you incur. We have to find a better way of evaluating our services. But we should also be creating environments that allow us to be more flexible for our employees. The pandemic, nothing good about this pandemic, but if we'd be stupid if we didn't take the lessons we took, and finding out there's a lot of employees that perform better, not all, but many perform better because you allow them to pick up their kids when they need to in the middle of the day. We've got to have more adult discussions around things like parental leave, not just having the time off to focus on family, but also to keep an oar in the water so that they can continue to be engaged with the firm and continuous learning and maintaining their licensure. And building the policies that allow that. I think we have huge opportunity. What we've lacked in the past is imagination. And I think we got a little bit of a bucket of cold water over us over the pandemic. And some of the things that we'd been telling ourselves is too much work or it's too radical, well, we've had to do it now. So why miss that opportunity? There are opportunities here to be more encompassing and more inclusive workplaces. Us as an association, what we're trying to do is wrestle in what could that look like? How can we be a resource to our members? How do we share best practice? Because as you alluded to, big firms, small firms, and everything in between. How do we facilitate the smartest? As I say, not that we've done anything wrong necessarily, but our decision-making, I would characterize as having been incomplete.
Mm-hmm. John, I wanted to just ask a follow-up question and then ask the rest of the panelists the same one. And this comes from Alexandre Lafortune. And Alexandre says, how can corporate engineering culture be reformed to place an emphasis on empathy to ensure more feel welcome? So what concretely can engineering workplaces do to ensure that empathy is pervasive in the workplace?
Well, I think it starts with just opening ourselves up and getting away and not being, tradition is great. And there's nothing wrong with having those signposts and building upon it. But recognizing perhaps the way you've done business in the past is not the right way to do it. How you trained engineers in the past may not be the right way. The poems in engineering of the 1920s may not be the right poems in engineering of 2020 or 2040 or 2060. So that's the first piece. It's understanding our own fallibility. It's getting rid of the confirmation and looking and putting it in engineering terms. We're making decisions with incomplete data. So we have to make structural changes to do that. So it's part of that. But I think where we as an association can do something helpful to our members is, instead of having everyone start this journey on their own and where do I start? If we can start synthesizing some of the best practices and providing tools and sharing amongst the industry and looking outside of our industry. We're not the only profession that's struggling with this. What are other professions doing? Again, this engineering-centric view of the world. Engineers don't rule the world. I'd hate to be in a world without engineers. And there's a lot that people can learn from our profession, but there's a lot we can learn from others. So I think we as an association, that's where we're heading. What are the tools? What are the best practices we can gather? Are there information we can share and facilitate? And then we're relying on that light bulb to go off, because, as I say, it's good business as well as being the right thing to do.
Griffin, your hand is up.
Yeah, on that topic, very specifically of empathy with an organization, my predecessor, Shanley McEwen, the previous president of the CFES, really brought empathy to our organization incredibly purposefully. It was something that I, to this day, incredibly admire her for. It was not an easy challenge. And I think we can share a couple lessons from our organization that maybe other structures of organizations can take. So we have incredibly high turnover, unfortunately by design. Every year, about 98% of our team changes out and a new person comes into their role. Now, obviously, that's a massive extreme, but we're seeing in the corporate world that to succeed and to grow your own career, people do have to change roles more often than they did in the previous century. And acknowledging that turnover within your own organization and seeing it as an opportunity to make cultural change. When people join your organization, they don't really know your culture. Sure, maybe they've heard of it, but they've never experienced it. And using that turnover to tell people what your culture is and show them very blatantly what your culture is as they join will start to shape the culture of your entire organization. If you hire, 5% of your organization at any given time, that's 5% of people that will now be absolutely sharing those new values. And I think being incredibly upfront about it. Sometimes when discussions weren't going well within our organization, Shanley would simply look at the person who was maybe starting to be a little bit over the top and ask them if how they were communicating was kind to everybody else here. And I've never seen somebody stop and just assess themselves if they're asked, when you ask them if they're being kind in that moment, in the discussion, in the argument that they're having. And it was, and I'm not nearly as good at it as she is. She is an absolutely incredible person. But it was so effective to see that happen. And maybe some of those lessons could be taken that we've learned specifically on that goal.
Carrie, what do women engineers need to from these employers to feel that they have a place in the workplace, that they feel that they can feel that they belong there?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. When I was an undergraduate student, not a lot of other women in my program, especially after I specialized in aerospace and engineering. And I remember sitting in one of my classes one time, and I'm not sure how we got onto this tangent. It was not a course on this topic, but the professor looked at me because I was one of the only women who was in the class that day and said, "Carrie, why are there so few female engineers?" And so I think one thing that we need, as any minoritized population within engineering needs, is to not have the burden of change put onto us all the time, right? I think that I was really interested in what you were saying, Griffin, and in sort of the potential of communication, which I think we often tend to think about as a kind of feminized field of knowledge or a feminized type of action, right? Especially the way you were talking about it in terms of kindness. I think it's really important for men to bring an emphasis on those things and an emphasis on the importance of those kinds of skills to engineering workplaces. I think that would be my starting point, at least. I want to if I may, on a slightly different topic, also speak to something that John was alluding to, which is really about the connection between empathy and opening up wider fields of view. For engineering, this isn't inherently related to gender, but it just reminded me of some of my own work experience in engineering industry. I think I spent about a year of my engineering industry career designing and redesigning one metal U-frame that was inside of one flat track fairing on an airplane, right? And this was the piece that I was working with week in and week out. I only ever saw a computer model of it. The factory where it was manufactured was in a different city, a couple of 100 kilometers away, and I didn't even have exposure to the way this piece looked in real life. I had exposure to the CAD model and the finite element models that I was working with on my screen. And so I think opening up our fields of view about the work that we are doing is really crucial here. And that can happen in small ways, like maybe a project manager making sure that their team members are aware of the larger technical context of the work that they are doing, as in my example, or it could happen in more dramatic or maybe more impactful ways, especially when engineers are working on projects that engage more directly with clients and communities.
John, I'm going to come to you, but first I did want to ask Jeanette this question, because Carrie was saying, she was making the point that the burden of making change should not be placed on the shoulders of women when it comes to, changing engineering culture. What do women engineers tell you about what they would need to feel as if they could feel, what they would need to belong in the engineering workplace? What is the kind of the workplace, if I can use this term, of their dreams?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I'm going to start to say that I and many other women in engineering, in addition to women, female identifying engineers, underrepresented engineers, I agree with Carrie, the burden of change should not be placed on those shoulders. The burden of education should not be placed on those shoulders. I mentioned a little bit earlier that we work with a research consortium called Engendering Success in STEM. And what they've done is they have looked at the various stages of a career, and a career extending from kindergarten age to early career, looking at what are the key barriers that hold female identifying engineers back from fully participating in the profession or even choosing the profession. And at the higher education institution stage, that is the university and college stage, and at the career stage, it's an unwelcoming workplace culture. So I would say that anyone who is underrepresented in a culture wants to have a welcoming culture. However, the levers for that culture are not necessarily in those individuals' hands, which goes back to what Carrie and I were saying about the burden cannot be put on the shoulders of those individuals. The levers are held by the leaders of those organizations. The levers are held by those in power, and the commitment needs to come from the leaders and those in power to make change. Engineers Canada has worked with a number of organizations in this area, and we've actually developed some employer guidance that's on our website, and we'll put the link in the chat. And the very first item talks about the importance of leadership. If leaders are not committed to make change, and if leaders do not use the power that they have to make change, then there is very little that anyone else could do. And I'll wrap up by giving a shout out to Shanley McEwen. Griffin mentioned her. She was Griffin's predecessor as a CFES president, and the very remarkable ideas and thoughts that she has shared about leadership and empathic leadership. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you, Jeanette. Randy, I'm going to go to you and then John. Your perspective on this.
Again, I'm going to bring it down to a couple of words. I think we will see change in the profession when we actively seek to decolonize and we actively seek to diversify. And that's when we're going to see the change. And I'm hopeful because I see the generations of students coming up, and they are way better than we were. And so I don't want to go into too much detail there, but that's absolutely what we need to do. We need to diversify and then decolonize together.
Mm-hmm. John Gamble?
Yeah, I was going to respond to Carrie originally, but I think there's actually a metaphor for what Janet was talking about. But you don't know what you don't know. So you need an open mind. That is an engineering asset. To simply say doing the same way, the way you've always done it, is terrible engineering. A lack of imagination is terrible engineering. And, you know, a very mundane example, a concrete curb is outstanding for managing surface runoff on a road. And if you've been doing this for 100, you know, the Romans did that, right? It works. It's great. You know what it's not great for? Somebody that has accessibility issues. And you may not even occur to you. It's not because someone's a lesser person. It's not because they're an insensitive person. If you haven't experienced trying to get up in a wheelchair up over a curb, it just doesn't occur to you, which is why we need the diversity of thought. Simple things that we can do, better things we can do. And we need to do that. And I agree, it has to start with leadership. But again, even on the leadership place, other than the design functions, leaders don't know what they don't know. And that's why it's important that we have discussions like this. This is why Janet challenges me all the time. Griffin, in his own Griffin kind of way, challenges me all the time, as many other people, my own employees. And we need these adult discussions, and do it without menace. Do it in the spirit that we want to be better as a profession. We want better outcomes, and we all want to live in better communities.
Well, John, here's another I think a challenging question that kind of throws down the proverbial gauntlet. Claudia Gomez Villeneuve says, engineers manage projects using targets. Our clients demand them and our management require them. Targets help us monitor for success and focus on final results. Engineering could address EDI using targets. For example, the number of women in engineering graduating classes in Canada has been around 20% for over 2 decades. But the companies that hire engineers are not using this 20% as a target for promoting employed female engineers to leadership positions. How can society encourage these companies to use these minimum targets? John?
Well, yeah, and what engineer doesn't love metrics? And they have to be viewed in context. Now, again, there are so many places where engineers work, and in terms of our sector, I think there is certainly awareness. We see some firms do have very specific metrics for engaging less represented populations within the firms. The others, they may not have a formal policy, but they certainly see that if your career track in your firm is less than the 20%, or you're leaking talent, that's generally regarded as a failure of your organization, and hence a lot of the discussions. Another challenge that we didn't allude to is it's not just employers, but a lot of engineers working for a organization will spend a lot of their career on different sites, whether it's a natural resource site, a construction site, whether it's field work. That's another tough nut, because now we're engaging with different cultures. And some of the things we need to do is we need project charters that will allow all the parties of an agreement to protect their employees on site. It's not unusual, and I know firms. I know firms in our organization. They pulled their people off a job site because of the treatment of some of their employees, but they do it at a contractual price, and we need to fix that piece of it too. So there's a lot of things we need to do. But yeah, I think we need to set goals for ourselves and recognize there's context, because we can't promote more people that are coming into the system. But there are things we can do before we get to that point, because at some point we will be able to. Do you have a retention strategy? Have you got the governance in place to allow things to happen? Sometimes it's the governance of an organization unintentionally that throws up barriers. When I started at my organization, it referred to the secretary as she and the treasurer as he. Probably was written back in the 1950s. That's important. We need to remove cultural barriers first. We need to identify the talent out there, and then we have to set goals for ourselves, and then recognize, though, if you're looking for diversity, it's not a quota, it's a qualification. And they're out there. There are capable people in all sorts of groups. If you want to make better decisions, go out and find them.
For this next question, I'm going to turn to Randy Herrmann. Randy, we know that engineers and engineering work intersect with Indigenous people and impact Indigenous communities in many ways. We also know that in Canada, Indigenous people continue to experience systemic racism and colonization in many forms, including environmental racism. For example, right now, 29 Indigenous communities lack access to clean water. Today, Indigenous lands make up around 20% of the Earth's territory, containing 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, a sign that some believe means that Indigenous peoples are the most effective stewards of the environment. So the question is, what do you want engineers to know about their role in the present state of the climate? And what do you think we as an engineering community can do and should do as part of our commitment to truth and reconciliation?
Yeah, those are kind of two really separate questions. So, the first part of that question is, what do I think? What do I want engineers to know about their role in the climate? You know, again, I'm probably going to step right off the pool into the deep end here, and I'm going to watch the comments blow up again after what I said last time. But engineers are at this crux in their history right now with regards to what's happening in the outside world, what's happening with the climate and degradation of the environment. And going forward, we are really going to have to ask ourselves as a profession whether we want to continue to be the foot soldiers of capitalism and colonialism or not. And that's going to be where our future lies, depending on how we answer that question. With regards to what you're saying, many traditional Indigenous societies have been very, very good at protecting the environments they live in. And I would say that again, going back to what I had said earlier about designing a better box, right? If we're thinking about how traditionally Indigenous people engineered their environment, they did so with a few very key concepts. Most of their inventions, most of their buildings were resilient. They were often looking at a generational timeline. Many of you will have heard about the 7th generation. Let's not think about what's good for us. Let's think about what's good 7 generations from now. Many of the things they did were community driven. It wasn't about being the richest person in your community. It was about being the person that you were the person that helped out most in your community. Their construction was generally easy, like I talked about the birch bark canoe. Virtually anyone could go into a wood in North America and come out with a vehicle that could get them from coast to coast to coast. They were very conscious of being environmentally friendly. Once they were done, their stuff kind of disappeared. We don't have a lot of their material culture left that was prior to colonization because the earth has reclaimed it. They would work with nature, not against it. They would design sustainably, and they would use local materials. To me, these are things that I think about when I think about Indigenous design, but more importantly, these are things I think about when I think about good design.
Mm-hmm. Randy, you're suggesting quite strongly that engineers have played the role of being foot soldiers for capitalism. And I think what you seem to be implying, what you seem to be suggesting is that following this capitalist model has led us to the abyss, or we're getting close to the abyss. So what model would you suggest?
Well, I think I would maybe turn that question back on you, Adrian. Do you think we're not close to the abyss? Like, do you think that the earth that we're in now is better than it was 150 years ago? Are we in a better place environmentally? Because to me, and maybe it's just fear mongering, but to me, when I read the papers and I read about climate change, I am worried about it. Absolutely worried about it. And then when I look at the fact that there are individuals, and again, things are going to blow up, but when I look at the fact that there are individuals in this world who are worth X hundred of $1 billion, and I drive down the streets in Winnipeg and I see people who are homeless, I think there has to be a better way. I'm not smart enough to suggest what that better way is, but I do know there has to be a better way. I do know that in traditional Indigenous economies and societies, homelessness wasn't a thing. I go up into the north, for the far north places in Nunavut, like Rankin Inlet, and they have community freezers. So a hunter goes out on the tundra, he shoots an animal, and then he brings the remains back to the community freezer. He takes the cut he wants for his family, but after that, anyone else can go to the community freezer who doesn't have the ability to hunt and harvest that. I'm not seeing that so much. Like, people are taken care of in these societies. And this is going back historically. This is the way it has been done. I'm not seeing that so much in our society.
John, Randy's saying that engineering is at a crossroads right now. So what's the way forward?
Well, the work of engineers, some of it is to serve business interests. There's no question about that. And also much of it is to do public assets. I do agree that we do have some very profound societal, economic, and environmental challenges ahead of us. I will certainly concede that we're not going to fix them by doing things the same way. And how do we not do things the same way? By having the same people tell us how to do things the same way. So I would say that there's some urgency to addressing the diversity of thought within the profession and within the industry, just like we need diversity of thought in public policy making, and we need it up and down the entire economic construct of our society. Groupthink is not going to help us address these problems. And part of the cultural inertia we need to overcome is somehow a profession, that goes back to Renaissance artists like Leonardo da Vinci, who was an engineer and an artist that was which was spoken to earlier. Since the Industrial Revolution, certainly we've been a little bit sort of we've been guilty of a lot of groupthink and traditional ways of doing things, and accepted societal outcomes, what we thought should be there. Obviously, that's not working going forward. The only way we're going to do that is by thinking differently. How do we think differently? By exposing ourselves to other ideas and thoughts. That applies to the management in engineering, it applies to the strategic plans in engineering and engineering organization, and it depends on how we deliver projects. Diversity of thought is our only hope of managing to find our way out of some of these challenges.
Carrie, what's the way forward?
I think, to Randy's point, and also to call back to the very beginning of this discussion when we were talking about the optimism and hope that we see reflected in so many of our students. Certainly this was my experience moving from being an engineering student to moving into the workplace, and I've seen it since beginning my teaching career in a couple of my students and former students. Feeling a bit disillusioned once they graduate and get out into industry, because they feel like they all these passions that they have that they want to pursue are being stifled, or in favor of corporate interests, again, to Randy's point. So I don't have a specific way forward, but my ask of engineers, whether they're students or professional engineers in industry, is to really think about what kind of work you're doing, and what ends those work that work is serving. And if you find that it's not really serving your values, or moving towards the type of world that you want to see, to ask what you can do about it. Now, that doesn't have to be a huge dramatic action. It could be talking to someone within the organization that you work for, or making steps to make the specific group that you work within more inclusive. But realizing that we all as engineers have agency. We don't have total control to fix things, but we have agency to do something. Thinking about that and realizing that agency is, I think, the way forward that I can suggest, or that I could hope for right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way forward in this conversation, we only have 8 minutes to go. And so in the interest of kind of expediting things, Jeanette, I think I'm going to ask you this question, because I think we have alluded to it a little bit earlier. Only individuals and firms licensed by a provincial regulator are permitted by law to undertake and assume responsibility for engineering projects in that province. Engineers Canada, your organization, is a national body that supports the regulators and acts as a voice of the profession. And as that voice, you have committed to championing an equitable, diverse, inclusive, and trustworthy engineering profession, and to accelerate the number of newly licensed female identifying engineers from its current 19% to 30% by 2030. Does Engineers Canada think that this target will be met? And if not, was this the right target?
Thanks, Adrian. I'm going to share a little bit of background before I jump into my response. So I wanted to start by saying that, as Adrian mentioned during the introductions, I'm Vice President Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at Engineers Canada. I'm also an engineer. My pronouns are she, her, elle. I'm Black, I'm an immigrant, I'm an able-bodied woman. I was born in Cape Town, South Africa during the time of apartheid. So for those of you who aren't familiar with apartheid, it's a system of institutionalized racism. My family was classified as colored because we were a mix of Black and white. And during apartheid, these classifications impacted such things as where people could sit on the bus, where they could live, where they could go to school, the kind of education to which they had access, and if they had access. I was the first person in my immediate family to attend university. I've had the very good fortune of having local, national, and global roles at an international consulting engineering company, including leading the Canadian International Sustainable Cities teams at that company. And I was the very first Black woman to be appointed to the senior leadership role of principal globally. Engineers Canada works very closely with the CFES. We seek guidance from our Indigenous Advisory Committee, of which Randy is a member. We collaborate with the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies Canada, and we've expressed our support for the work of Retool the Ring. I'm honored to be on this panel with my fellow panelists, and Adrian, thanks for being our moderator. So why am I sharing this? It's because we all bring our specific identities to the paths that we walk. One of my identities is as a female identifying engineer. But I know that to make the change that's needed, it's not possible, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, it's not possible to put this on the shoulders of female identifying engineers alone. We need to be able to make this change together. We need to have organizations beyond Engineers Canada and our engineering regulators to make the change. And Adrian, you asked, what is 30 by 30? Well, it's a goal that was originally established by one of our regulators, our Alberta regulator, was then adopted by Engineers Canada's board, and then endorsed by all 12 engineering regulators. About 2/3 of our university and colleges have also signed on. Right now, it's a little bit too early to tell if the target will be met. And I say that because in 2020, we reached an all-time high of 20.6%. Essentially, we reached 20 by 20. And I stress this because when we started out in this journey in 2015, we found it very hard to believe that we would get to 20 by 20. In 2021, our number went down a little bit to 19.8%, so almost 20%. But we don't yet know if this decrease was due to COVID and the gendered impacts of COVID, or if it was something more. We'll have a better understanding once our 2022 data are all in and they're analyzed. Now, was it the right target? 30% is a good target from a change perspective. It signifies a tipping point, a point at which change becomes sustainable. However, 30 by 30 is not just about the numbers, and we talked a little bit about this earlier. It's about culture change, it's about retention, it's about collaboration. If there was no 30 by 30, we would not have the national network of champions that we currently have today. We wouldn't have the collaboration that we're seeing today. We wouldn't have the knowledge sharing. The culture change needs to happen in our educational institutions and also in our workplaces. And leaders in our education institutions and our workplaces, the leaders that hold the power, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, and the levers that need to make change need to work together. John spoke about working together. It's that collaboration that will make the impact, that will make the change that's necessary. What about lessons learned? Well, we've learned a lot of lessons. And first of all, it's a systems change effort. It's a collaborative effort. It's an effort that requires the buy-in and support of those who have the power to make change. Again, it's not the women who need to change. It's the culture that needs to change. Second, over time, we've changed course to be able to identify that engineers alone are not going to be able to make change. We need to work closely with research consortiums. We need to work closely with other experts, psychologists, sociologists, for example. And a key focus now for us, knowing that we're getting closer to 2030, is on employers. We've developed guidance for employers. The link is in the chat. And we are continuing to dig deep into our work with employers and the workplaces. Back to you, Adrian.
Well, thank you, Jeanette. You know, one thing that I've learned over these last, almost hour and a half is that we need more time.
Yes, absolutely.
we need more time to have this conversation, because clearly there's a lot to talk about. And we have about 2 minutes left in this session. And so unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap things up. And so perhaps I can ask all of you this question. You've all shared a lot of information about what you see as the role, opportunities, and barriers for engineers to address social inequity and a culture of exclusion. So this is the question, and perhaps I'll begin with you again, Jeanette. If you had to summarize your thoughts into a bumper sticker a tattoo or a social media post, what would it say?
Thanks, Adrian. So I would say that it would be there's a place for you, and it comes from my own personal perspective as well as a societal perspective. Coming from South Africa during the time of apartheid, there would not have been a place for me in a profession such as engineering. And still, there's not a place for me or those like me in the profession of engineering. So my bumper sticker would say, there's a place for you. Back to you, Adrian.
Okay, thank you. Griffin, what would your bumper sticker say? Or hashtag?
Yeah, my bumper sticker or tattoo, you know, I've been looking to get one, would say, help them help you. You have students who are coming out with different educations, with education on top of what they, or what you might have graduated with people adding in a focus on climate and society into their design projects. And they need support to fight, to overcome that inertia, that cultural inertia within organizations. So if you want them to help you, you need to empower them so that they can empower you, your organization, and our entire community.
Thank you, Griffin. John.
Diversity results in better organizations, better projects. It's the right thing to do. And frankly, it makes the world a more interesting and a better place to be in.
Thanks, John. Carrie.
Mine's not catchy. I feel bad about that. But there's the message that I always try and leave my students with at the end of the semester is about the importance of listening to and respecting other ways of understanding the world. That's the first part. And the second part, particularly with respect to the Retool the Ring efforts, I would say is to act because it's right and not because it's what we've always done.
Thanks, Carrie. And Randy, the final word to you.
Oh, goody. I might have two. One would be acknowledge your privilege, and the other one would be decolonize now.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. And maybe I'll add this. We're all in the process of becoming. We're all in the process of becoming. Thank you all for a very, very engaging, spirited conversation. I think it was insightful. It was incisive. It was enlightening. It was even edifying. So thank you all for your contributions this afternoon. And at this point, I'd just like to, and also I'd like to thank our audience. There were so many questions, and there are so many questions that still need to be answered. So I'm sure that we'll create more space for these kinds of discussions. So thank you very much for your participation. Your contribution certainly made a difference to the session this afternoon. So at this point, I'd just like to ask Gerard, if Gerard could come forward and offer some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And I just realized I need a bigger bumper for my car. I want to welcome everyone and thank them for joining us in this very timely discussion. I'm Gerard McDonald, and I'm the CEO at Engineers Canada. And I want to thank Adrian, John, Randy, Jeanette, Carrie, and Griffin for this great discussion about the future of engineering and the culture shift that's taking place to ensure that engineers reflect the communities that they serve and continue to protect the public and make our lives better through our work. I also want to thank the Belonging and Engagement team who brought you this session today, namely Kim, Yasmin, Eileen, and Kathy for organizing the event. You may not know, but today in Ontario, at least, is actually Professional Engineers Day. And being the first of March, it's the start of National Engineering Month. So throughout the month, there's going to be hundreds of events taking place across the country. And I encourage you to go out to our national event calendar to learn more. I also want to invite you to our next big event that will be taking place in May. Each year, Engineers Canada organizes a national Accelerating 30 by 30 conference, an event dedicated to supporting women in engineering. This year's theme is championing change in the workplace and focuses on employer leadership. So something we were talking about today. We will be hosting virtual events on May 3rd, 10th, and the 17th. And this all leads up to an in-person summit that will take place on May 24th in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Registration for these events are open and the link is in the chat. Until then, I wish you all a happy National Engineering Month and look forward to seeing you all in May. Thanks, Adrian, again.
Thank you, Gerard. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Be well.